We are now recording, there we go, and I will hand over to Anna. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you very much, Rhiann, and thank you to everybody who's attending this evening. I'm just going to start by giving you a little bit of background to the review that we're undertaking at the moment. Daventry District Council actually has a statutory duty to undertake conservation area reviews, both of its existing conservation areas, as well as exploring the possibility of new designations. So a district-wide review is currently underway, and that of course includes looking at Spratton as well. There's currently no conservation area in Spratton. The possibility of the village being designated as a conservation area is suggested in the village design statement, which is a supplementary planning document that was produced by Spratton residents in 2013. At that time, unfortunately, the council didn't have the resources to carry out the necessary work to undertake a review. So at the moment, this review that we're doing at the moment, it's a really good opportunity to undertake an appraisal of the village to see whether it or particular parts of it merit a designation. If the review does find that Spratton merits a conservation area, as part of that process, a boundary will be proposed, and we'll also produce a draft conservation area appraisal and management plan. And I think Rhiann's going to talk a little bit more about that in detail a bit later on. So a little bit of information about conservation areas in general. Conservation areas are areas of special architectural or historic interest, which are designated by local planning authorities, as I've said, through the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990. So the District Council has that responsibility to identify and designate new conservation areas. Over 10,000 conservation areas have been designated nationwide since they were first created in 1967 as part of the Civic Amenities Act. Conservation areas have been designated over many different types of area, and they include residential areas, industrial areas, commercial and landscape areas, and they vary in size from just a handful of buildings to many hectares of countryside. Because conservation areas vary so much, their character is created and influenced by many different factors, and this can include factors such as types of land use, the age of buildings, or the consistent use of open spaces, the use of particular materials or styles of architecture, or the impact of fortuitous or purposeful design as well. There are currently over 30 conservation areas in the district. The majority are rural villages, but there's also a conservation area in Daventry town as a medieval market town, and also parts of the Grand Union Canal that run through the district are also designated. So if an area is designated as a conservation area, this status introduces some additional planning controls, and the purpose of those is to seek to enhance or preserve the character and appearance of the area. And we'll have a look at what those extra planning controls are in a minute or two. So looking at Spratton in particular, its character is influenced by a number of different factors, and these include the significant age of many of its buildings, which largely date to between the 16th and 19th centuries. The map on this slide shows buildings in Spratton that are designated as listed buildings, and those are the buildings that are shaded in red on the map. There are actually 10 listed buildings in the village. There are also a large number of other historic buildings that are not listed, but which nonetheless, they're really important to the character and the history of the village. So Spratton's character is also derived from the variety of different building types and scales, and they range from small cob-built cottages to the larger historic houses, which are often sort of former farmhouses built out of ironstone, and also to the three-storey Georgian houses such as Spratton Hall and houses on Church Road as well. There's consistent use of vernacular building materials within the historic part of the village for both dwellings and former agricultural buildings and boundary treatments as well. Materials such as ironstone, cob, red brick, and for roofing, slate roof tiles and thatch, and that consistent use of these vernacular building materials really creates a coherent character to the village. Spratton has retained much of its historic layout, and that's sort of shown in this Ordnance Survey map from 1885, and it shows that all the roads and lanes in the historic parts of the village were well developed routes by this date, and actually the street pattern is likely to be ancient, possibly dating back to the medieval period. And this historic street pattern has survived despite a sort of change in the prominence of the north-south routes through the centre of the village after the Welford Turnpike was constructed in 1721. So as well as the all the historic buildings and the historic street pattern, there are also some archaeological areas of interest, such as the medieval Holloway earthworks, known as the Rowley Banks, which would have been a continuation of the High Street in the medieval period, leading on towards Cretan. And open spaces also play an important part in the character of the village, particularly the churchyard at its centre, and the small rectangular green at the junction of School Road and Manor Road, and also the spaces that enable views out of the village to the surrounding countryside and over towards Brixworth on the east side of the village. So as I mentioned a minute ago, conservation area status introduces some additional planning controls, and I'm just quickly going to run through what those cover. So they cover the demolition of buildings that are over a particular size, development works including building or demolishing walls, gates or fences, cladding to buildings, alterations to roofing, all side and some rear extensions, outbuildings, and the installing of radio antennae or satellite dishes in particular locations. There are also some controls over works to trees over a particular size, although this is more of a notification process rather than having to apply for planning permission to carry out works. So if there's a tree over a particular size in the conservation area, before works are carried out to it, notification of 6 weeks has to be given to the council. So for the other things that I've just mentioned, which do require planning permission, planning applications are determined with reference to published guidance and any other material considerations, such as an adopted conservation area appraisal. So I'm going to just hand back to Rhiannon now, and she's going to talk a little bit about conservation area appraisal and management plans.
Thanks, Anna. So as Anna's already mentioned, conservation areas are designated due to their special interest, and as part of the reviews that we undertake, we produce what's called a conservation area appraisal and management plan. And these documents express that special interest that's been identified, and also identifies particularly what about an area is important, what makes it special, and also highlights areas that could potentially benefit from enhancement in the future, and also any threats to the character of the conservation area that might be identified. So conservation area appraisals vary depending on the authority or group that produces them. In general, they usually contain an explanation of the development of an area, and this explains the historic interest of a conservation area and can include any known or possible archaeological interest in the area. And usually they also contain information about the architecture, which fulfills the explanation of the architectural interest of a conservation area. And this is often expressed, as Anna's mentioned, through building types, materials, styles and ages. That then goes to fulfill, as I said, that architectural interest that is expected in a conservation area. So the appraisals that we produce in-house also includes information on various other elements, particularly spatial features, which contribute to how a conservation area is experienced. And this includes things like views within the conservation area, from the conservation area and towards it as well. And also things like open spaces within the area or surrounding it, modes of movement through a conservation area, which might include public footpaths or historic routes. And we also explore the public realm as well and identify elements such as street furniture, signage and lighting, and whether they make a positive or a negative impact on the character of the conservation area. And altogether, this information provides a useful guide for applicants and decision makers in assessing whether any development or smaller works are appropriate and whether they will preserve or enhance the character of the conservation area, which is the duty in the determination of applications to make sure that they preserve or enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area. So if we could have the next slide, please, Anna. Thank you. The appraisals that are adopted by Daventry District Council go to be adopted as supplementary planning documents. So this means that they are a material consideration in the determination of planning decisions, which would affect the special interest of the conservation area. As Anna's mentioned, there is a village design statement for Spratton, the conservation area appraisal would sit on the same level as that, as another supplementary planning document, and would also sit within the hierarchy of documents, which includes the development plan, which is the settlements and countryside local plan, and also includes neighbourhood plans. So neighbourhood plans and the local plans sit above in terms of decision making in their weight, and the conservation area appraisal and village design statement would have the same amount of weight in decision making. And all together, these documents are used to determine planning decisions, along with national policy as well, and the national planning policy framework. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. One of the other things that we do as part of the conservation area review is we identify potential candidates for the Daventry local list. And Daventry District Council maintains a list, a local list, which identifies buildings and sites that are considered to be locally important, but usually don't meet the criteria for statutory listing, or in the case of archaeology, wouldn't meet the criteria for being scheduled monument. So local lists play an essential role in building and reinforcing a local sense of character and distinctiveness in the historic environment, and they're part of the wider range of designations in the historic environment. And although local list status doesn't introduce additional planning controls, it does enable the significance of any building or site on the list to be better taken account in planning applications that affect the building, site or their setting. Generally, as I said, buildings or sites added to the local list are those unlikely to be statutorily designated. but it doesn't necessarily preclude that happening. That isn't under the control of the District Council, though. That is a decision that's made by Historic England and the Secretary of State. So candidates on the local list are instead recognised as something that's called a non-designated heritage asset, which is a term you may have heard. It's a planning term. And these are assets of local importance, and they're given protection through policy rather than legislation. So the local list candidates are identified as part of the field work and research that's carried out during the conservation area review, and they are assessed against a set of criteria that has been adopted by the council. And if they meet those criteria, they are consulted on as part of the conservation area appraisal process. And whether they are adopted onto the local list is again decided as part of the council decision on whether to adopt the supplementary planning document, the conservation area appraisal, and the conservation area boundary. So any buildings in Spratton that are being proposed to be added to the local list will be set out in the appraisal and management plan document. Members of the public can also propose buildings for inclusion on the local list or sites. So if there's a particular building or site that we haven't put forward in the draft appraisal when it's produced, if you send us the details and any reason, as much reasoning as you can provide, and any supplementary evidence as why you think it should be added to the local list, then we can consider including it and put it against the set of criteria, and then if it meets those criteria, then we can add it to the candidates for the local list for council to make a decision on. So if I could have the next slide, please, Anna. Thanks. As we've already mentioned, conservation area status introduces some extra planning controls, but a lot of minor development, such as domestic alterations and a number of extensions, can usually be carried out without planning permission under the provisions of the 2015 General Permitted Development Order, the GPDO. And this can lead to incremental changes taking place that gradually erode aspects of the fabric of historic buildings and their historic character and that of the overall conservation area as a result. Article 4 of the GPDO gives local planning authorities the power to limit permitted development rights, which is what they're termed, where they consider it's necessary to protect local amenity or the well-being of an area. And using the provisions of Article 4 can bring certain types of development back under the control of a local planning authority. And then potentially harmful proposals can be considered on a case-by-case basis through the planning application process. So this is another part of the work that we do during the conservation area reviews, where we identify features that would benefit from being included in an Article 4 direction. And if considered appropriate, they are proposed in the conservation area appraisal as part of the supplementary planning document. And this would include the potential permitted development rights for to be removed and the locations which would be affected by this. But the actual Article 4 direction doesn't come into force as the result of the adoption of the appraisal. The Article 4 direction would have to be put in place through a separate process which would take place after conservation area designation and require a further consultation process. So it would be something that would happen if a conservation area is designated once that had happened. Can I have the next slide, please, Anna? Thank you. So in terms of the process and timetable for the conservation area review, officers from DDC do all the fieldwork and research to produce the draft appraisal, and we do this with input from colleagues from our development control department others across the council, including our conservation area and landscape officer, conservation officer and landscape officers, if appropriate, a boundary will be suggested. We welcome input from the community at these early stages. So if there's any information that you think should be included in the appraisal or any aspects of the area that you think should be brought to our attention, then we'd be grateful to receive any information that you have. Once the draft appraisal has been produced, there is a 6-week consultation process during which time we welcome formal comments on the draft appraisal and the boundary if one is proposed. At the moment, we anticipate that this will be sometime in the spring. And during that time, the draft appraisal will be available to view online and hopefully in local libraries too, but that does depend on the situation with COVID-19. And all the information at that stage will be provided to local parish councils and residents through our usual publicity channels. And during the formal consultation, we also usually hold an exhibition, which would again probably take the form of what we've got tonight, so a virtual exhibition, which would entail us providing details of any proposals that are being made. So there would be another opportunity at that stage for people to view the proposals and provide their feedback and ask questions. Once the consultation has closed, what we do is we compile all of the comments in a report, and we then put our officer responses to those comments and any resulting changes to the proposed boundary or the appraisal. And then the report is presented to the council members at the district council, and the council decides whether to adopt the new boundary and the appraisal as a supplementary planning document. And following that decision, we contact residents in writing to notify them that there's been a change or that there's been an adopted a boundary put in place. If the conservation area boundary was adopted, then, if a conservation area boundary is adopted, then additional planning controls that we mentioned earlier would come into force once it's been designated and apply to all of the properties within the designated area. So you may be familiar with the fact that Daventry District Council will most likely be absorbed into West Northamptonshire Council in the new financial year. And in these cases, the work that's being undertaken by the individual authorities as the conservation area reviews is a statutory duty. This is something that will continue even if Daventry District Council itself doesn't exist. The work that's being undertaken will then just be carried on by the new council, and the process remains or is likely to remain the same. Just the branding will probably be different. So that's effectively what will happen with that. There shouldn't really be any alteration to our process in relation to the change to West Northamptonshire Council. So if I could have the next slide, please, Anna. Thank you. Here are our details. So that's our email there, heritage@daventrydc.gov.uk. If you'd like to submit any questions at all to us or any information you have about the area or as I said, any potential local list candidates that you might want to put forward, then you can provide details to us either via that email or if you prefer by post, there's our postal address as well. And if you would like further information, either on the conservation areas or to see examples of conservation area appraisals that have been done, you can go onto our website and see our conservation areas page. And that will also provide links to the local list webpage and the Article 4 directions webpage as well, which provides a bit more information on those aspects of the conservation area review work that we do. So I think that's the final slide, and we've certainly got some time for questions. So I'll just have a look at the chat. Oh no, sorry, there were some things in the chat, but I don't think they're questions for the session, so that's fine. Okay, so thanks, Anna, for putting that presentation up. And I'll just open it up. If anybody has a question, you can, because I don't think I can see everybody. Oh no, I can see. Yes, no, some people haven't got their cameras on. So if you have got a question, then you can raise your hand either in person, I can see one already noted, or on the participants at the bottom there. If you click on participants, you should be able to raise your hand by clicking on the three little dots, I think, at the bottom of that. If you can't, and if worse comes to worse, then if you want to, you can just shout. So I think first of all it was yes, Enid Jarvis, would you like to ask a question?
It's an input of information, and I'm speaking as the chair of Spratton Local History Society, which is a very active society and has already done a tremendous amount of work of the sort that you've just described. We did try to get a conservation area going. We didn't get as far as Daventry. We did find one or two problems with some of the villagers, but we already have a village heritage trail leaflet. We do guided tours, which is a shot there, pointing out the most significant buildings. We also have done quite a bit of research with architectural historians on buildings other than the listed buildings in Spratton. You mentioned the local or buildings of significance. And I've got here a list of about 8 other buildings of some historical significance, including that long cob wall that you showed a picture of, which happens to belong to me. I just really wanted to give you that information, that we have already done a tremendous amount of work on this.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. And I think Anna, I'll hand over to Anna, because Anna has much more of an input into the actual appraisal work. But I think Anna is already fairly aware of a lot of that information. But I'll pass over to her. Yeah,
thanks, Rhiannon. Yeah, thanks for those comments, Enid. Yeah, I am aware of the work and how active the local history society is, and particularly, I've been having a look at the fantastic website that there is for the village and the local history. But the information you just mentioned on the architectural studies of those particular buildings, I'd be really interested to see that, because
did I send that to you? I can't remember whether I sent that one to you.
I think you sent me the local history trail,
yes.
So thank you very much for that, but I don't think you sent the information about
I've got it on my computer. I'll send you that.
That would be fantastic. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks. Would anyone else like to ask a question or put any information forward? Yes, John Hunt.
Hello. I'm just wondering, in the case of a list, yeah, I'm on non-mute. In the case of a listed building, I think the land that goes with a property, as it were, within the curtilage, or is it, yeah, within the curtilage of the listed property, is included. So when a house comes within, or within the conservation area, how much land, if any, is within the conservation area?
In terms of, so does the conservation area have a curtilage itself, you mean?
Yeah, yes, either. Yeah, where do you draw the line? When you know, say there's a lovely 17th century house, do you draw the line across the house and that's it? Or where if you draw the line across the house, does it include the garden out the back? Yeah. Or do you draw your line, if you like the garden, around the back of the garden? How does that work?
So that's a good question. When we do our conservation area appraisal work, the main criteria for including areas or buildings within the conservation area is that they have an architectural or historic interest. So that can include both standing buildings and areas of landscape, for example, or archaeological interest. And it certainly could include the gardens and the plots of historic properties. Generally, we try very hard not to cut a conservation area through a garden. If we are including a property, most of the time we include its garden, its whole boundary. The only times that we would purposefully cut across a property's garden is if there was a very, very clear reason why on the ground. So, for example, if there was a particularly obvious boundary, either an earthwork or a boundary wall, for example. But generally, those tend to delineate the entire extent of a plot. So we tend to take them right up to that. Mainly because of management. So often when we're undertaking our conservation area reviews of existing conservation areas, we do have people approaching us to say that previously the conservation area has been designated running through their garden, for example, and hasn't included the whole plot. And this often leads to quite a lot of confusion, particularly when it comes to things like the notification process for trees. Because if a tree, for example, straddles the boundary, or there are some trees that are very, very close to the boundary, it can become difficult to know whether they are in or out of the conservation area. So my answer to that would be, we always, as far as we can, try and include the whole plot of a property if we are designating a conservation area, unless there is a very, very clear physical boundary that we would run to that isn't the whole boundary, but 99% of the time it is.
And I'm still not quite clear in the sense of, I understand what you're saying about drawing the boundary and what you prefer to do. But if the land doesn't have any heritage value, would you still, if you had a house that clearly did have heritage value, would you still include the land? Or say, well, as we checked and there's absolutely nothing of interest in that garden or field, therefore the line will just be drawn along the back of the physical house itself?
So yes, generally we would include the whole plot, so we would include the garden as well. And often with historic properties, particularly in villages, the plots have often been retained well, and they form part of the sort of legibility of how the village has developed. But also the back garden development, if as effectively as sometimes it's termed, can have quite a big impact on the character of a conservation area. And so apart from the management side, where it does become a little bit tricky if you've got a designation running through somebody's garden, it can also leave the setting of a conservation area, which is the area around a conservation area, slightly more vulnerable to development through those permitted development rights that we spoke of before. It also can become a little bit tricky in terms of where one person's garden may be in and one person's garden may be out. And in terms of, again, just future management, it's much, much easier and isn't necessarily particularly much more onerous to just include the whole of a plot of a property, and that's generally the best practice.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, are there any other questions anybody would like to ask or information they'd like to give? Yes, yeah, Ina Jarvis, yeah.
I'm quite interested at the late stage that you have suggested, that you write to the people who've got houses in the proposed conservation area. What we found when we tried this before was some of them were very, very outspoken and simply didn't want to know. And it just seemed to me a little bit late in the proceedings that you spoke to them. Do you find it causes any difficulties with householders?
Generally, we first, if I could explain why we do that, the consultations that we undertake, so this informal consultation and then the formal one later, if we were to make any proposals, we advertise those through local channels, and we quite often get a good response to our consultations.
There's not many of them here tonight. That's one of the things I was just really wondering how you dealt with it.
So we use as many local channels as we can, things like Facebook, parish council, websites, for example, putting up posters, and generally the reason we don't write to people specifically at this stage is because it can become complicated if you write to somebody who we don't know at this stage whether we're going to propose a conservation area. And if we were to write to people only in an area that we thought we were going to propose, then you might have one person being sent a letter on on a street, and then where the proposed boundary might finish, the next person wouldn't necessarily get that letter. And so we prefer to use just as many local channels as we can to do that work. Generally, it doesn't cause us much of a headache in terms of having people respond, and it should be pointed out that the work we do, whilst consultation is a really important part of what we do, the work that we do is technical, and it is something that the council has a duty to undertake, and so the consultation we do is with the view to having as much local input as possible, but effectively it is the council members that take the decision in the end, and it's been agreed that consultation process is how we will go forward, and it's the one that we've used for our existing conservation areas, and it's been working fairly well for us in that sense. So I think, obviously it depends on, every single place is different, and we just encourage local people to try and spread the word as much as possible. And I must actually say that having I think we had 18 people respond. I don't think we've had 18 people actually turn up, but we've had 18 people respond to this event, which is a really good turnout for us, which it might not necessarily seem like a lot, but this is a really good number, particularly for a virtual event. So it is quite encouraging, this sort of number of people.
Did advertise it among the members of the History Society?
Yes, thank you.
Here. Some of them are here tonight. Yes. Okay.
Are there any other questions at all? Yes, George Matz, yeah.
Hi, George. Going on to John's question about land, I farm not a bit of land on the chat, so it's not get to that. But you mentioned, and John says land can be included in it, which I kind of understand. And then you say we can't put up fences and things like that. I'm a sheep farmer. How far does this go? I understand I might not be able to put up sheep pens and things without planning permission. And separate, I've actually applied for a Haysha, but that's entirely separate. But you say you can't put fences up. Is that including sheep fences? Is it just garden fences? Where does it start and stop for a practical farm, on the ground?
So in terms of the types of land that we usually include in a conservation area, we can include open countryside that might be around the built form, for example, but that would usually be where it has a particular positive impact on the particular character of the area. So that would be something that would be proposed as part of the consultation, and there would be an opportunity to comment on anything that we propose. In terms of actually the specifics of fencing, the planning regulations for putting up fences in conservation areas is that they require planning permission if you're going to put up a fence that is, or a gate or a wall that is 1 metre or above where it fronts a highway. So if it were to front a highway or a footway, a bridleway or a waterway, and if it doesn't front a highway, then it's 2 metres. And I know that there are also exemptions for certain development to do with agricultural and land and forestry. So whenever we have anything to do with agricultural land that might cross over into a conservation area, our general advice is to get in touch with our development control department. Probably not at this stage necessarily, because I don't know whether there'll be a proposal to put any particularly large or open pieces of land in the conservation area, and I suspect probably not at this stage, but I can't be completely 100%. But if that were to be proposed, then yeah, getting in touch with our development control department to see what permitted development rights were open to you is what we would advise. Yeah, in terms of fences, it's that highway rule with 1 metre. So if it was above 1 metre against a highway, then you would have to get planning permission.
Stop fencing next to a public footpath.
If it's next to a public footpath, yeah. But if it's also, if you're just renewing the fencing, then you don't have to. If it's just like for like, so you're literally just renewing it or making repairs, for example, then you don't have to have planning permission for that. It's only if you're putting a fence in, or a wall or a gate where there hasn't previously been one, or it's a very, very dramatic change in design or size, for example.
Thank you.
Any other questions at all? Oh, got one in the chat. Oh yes, there is one in the chat. Just have a look. Well, that might be, oh, so, no, sorry, that's to do with the previous matter that was being talked about before, sorry.
Rihanna, I've got just a couple of quick ones.
Yep.
Will the new government planning proposals affect the conservation area? And the other one was, I wonder whether I or we can have a copy of the PowerPoint, because I'd quite like to be able to send it to the other councillors on the council.
Yes, of course, yeah. On the second point, we're recording this session and we will put it on our website, but we'll also send it to everybody. We'll send a link to everybody who's attended tonight. So if you want to revisit the PowerPoint, then you'll be able to do that. On the first question about was it the planning white paper that you were, yeah. So I'm familiar with the planning white paper, and as far as we're aware, there shouldn't be any direct influence on the regulations to do with conservation area legislation. And at this stage, we can't necessarily state that there'll be any specific changes as a result of it, but it is obviously a visionary document, so it might be that there are changes to policy down the line, but at this stage there isn't anything that directly affects the conservation area regulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Martin, have you been involved in anything like this before?
I lived in a conservation area in Blakesley, and I had to make ask for permission to make alterations. I was very much in favour of the conservation area in Blakesley, which is South Northants, of course.
Any other questions or anything anyone would like to raise? Incidentally, if you'd rather not ask questions here, then you can email us at our heritage email at any time if you've got any questions after this. You can also get in touch with us through the telephone number of the council as well, which terribly I can't remember off by heart, but it's on our website. So if you would like to get in touch with us by phone, you can do that as well.
I'd like to thank you very much, both of you, for a very clear presentation to us. And I mean, you mentioned you'd like some input from the community, and I think we'd like to go back to our members and tell them of some of the things that you've said tonight. And so I thank you for a very clear presentation.
No, that's very kind. Thank you very much, and we appreciate everybody giving their time, particularly this evening. So, and definitely, if you'd like to disseminate the information to your members, that's something we'd be very grateful for, and any information that anybody would like to provide us with, we're always grateful for, and encourage the input from local residents, particularly active history societies who might have very, very useful and already assimilated information for us. That's always really useful.
So yeah, I'm just thinking, I'm really thinking of the next step, and there's bound to be people for and people against, and I'm just wondering, you know, how do we say to you, oh well, we're not sure, we think most people don't really want it, or they do. Do you say, well, let's do the appraisal first and then you decide, or how do we do it?
Yeah, so that's again another good question. The input that we seek from the local community is both, as I've said, that information that can be really valuable to us, that local sort of input of information that we might not necessarily be able to get, and also it's a chance for people to ask questions, and we would always encourage, if somebody is or isn't keen on the idea of a conservation area, usually when people aren't keen, we would much rather them contact us, and we're happy to have a chat and go through as many questions as they have. You know, if people have got any concerns about a conservation area, if they're not familiar with the concept, or even if they are and they just want to ask questions, then, you know, they obviously are welcome to put their views forward. But usually what we do is, because it's a technical piece of work, if an area has an architectural or historic interest, then we have a duty to designate it. So the input from a community is very, very useful. But for example, if a community if there were members of the community who didn't want a conservation area, then we would still be under a duty to present our proposals if we considered that a conservation area was merit-worthy. So that's usually how we do it. If we consider a conservation area should be designated, then we create the appraisal, put it forward, and then the community then has an opportunity, to respond formally to that. And the positive about that is that at this informal stage, the only thing we can really do is communicate verbally to our council members, for example, the kind of general feeling of local communities, whereas through a formal consultation, people can put their views forward, and then we can directly show those views to our council members, so it's much more transparent and open. And then it's the council who take the decision whether to adopt or not, and that is on the balance of the professional input of us and what we technically recommend, and then the views of the community. So going forward, what we'll do is we'll prepare our appraisal and any proposals that we feel we should make. And then at that stage, we will invite comments from the local community.
But you're the driving force from beginning to end, basically.
In this particular sense, in this particular case, yes, as we're doing the review across the district, we are motivated by the duty to undertake those reviews, and the final decision will be made by the council. But it is important to note that one of the reasons that Spratton is being looked at is because of the previous work that's been done by the community to record that information about its historic and architectural interest, and the work through the village design statement as well, because when we're actually looking at the areas to designate as new conservation areas, a few years ago, before we started the project, we looked at all of the villages pretty much in Daventry district, and we created effectively a list of the ones that needed looking at as a priority, and things like a local community having already done some work, as well as the village quite clearly having an architectural and historic interest already, a high heritage interest. These are factors that all sort of flowed into the decision then to look at Spratton as one of the new potential new designations.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any further questions? We've still got a little bit of time if anybody does have anything. I think I'll take that probably as a no. We're a little bit early, but hopefully that means you can all get away and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thank you very much, Anna, for the presentation as well. And we will let you all know as soon as the presentation is available on our website. And if you do have any questions, as I said, please feel free to get in touch with us. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.